Well, thank you very much, Asan, and good morning. We'll move towards our weather briefing here, and I guess I'll say at the outset, a very another wet week in many places. And the bottom line, I think, with our outlook is probably more of the same, or at least similar to what we've been. But a lot of superlatives here, and some of them are not positive ones regarding weather extremes. But I'll chat more about that in a second. Starting quickly, looking at the last week, on the left-hand side here are mean temperature departures for the previous week, and they range from a little bit above normal, a degree or two, you can see here in the western lower, to a degree or two below in the northern part of the state. But we weren't very far away from where we typically are with climatology this time of the year. But I think it's also interesting to say that we have this was the first week, at least for the western part of the state, that we had been cooler than normal for 2, in some cases 3 weeks in a row, and that string was at least broken last week, but it wasn't very far away from normal. More importantly, here on the right-hand side, these are precipitation totals for the week through the 2nd, or through yesterday morning, and the yellow indicates 2 inches or more, and you can see a large swath across southern lower, another one across central lower, and that's been a repeated case here during the last several weeks. Some areas picked up more than 4 inches again, so a very wet week. And then less as you went north. You can see some parts of the far northern lower, some portions of upper Michigan, less than half an inch. But that's the exception in the state. It was, for much of certainly the southern half of the lower, it was another very wet week, and followed a very wet July, which is where I want to go next, because this is when we really start to have to put this in some perspective. On the left-hand side here are totals, or observed totals, for the month of July. This is using the combined data set with radar estimation to fill in some of the gaps down to a couple miles resolution. But the reality is here, and it's pretty impressive. For much of southern lower Michigan, the southern half of lower Michigan, at least 5 or 6 inches fell during the month of July. The pink color here, you can see a couple spots of that. If you're up close to your screen, you can see the Chicago area picked up. That's 10 inches or more. But we did have some spots here, Montcalm County, and then a little strip eastward from there across Gratiot and over into Midland and into the Saginaw Valley in the northern thumb, and even south of that into the thumb, where there were solid 8 to 10 inch totals for the month. Now, that's a lot of water. That's a huge amount of water. And in some cases, we probably do have new all-time records for the month of July. Most of those records are up in that 9 or 10 inch range, depending on the location. So at some places, I think it's safe to say that we did set new records. We're trying to confirm that right now based on the data. But regardless, much wetter than normal. And on the right-hand side here, this is also July, and these are departures from normal. And we see colors on them we typically don't see in these maps. In some cases, again, certainly more than 5 inches excess. In terms of percent of normal, for a lot of these areas that had 6 to 10 inches of rain, we're talking 200 to 300% of normal, which is extraordinary for any month, but especially in the middle of the growing season. And especially, as everybody knows, it followed up on severe dryness and drought conditions early in the year. This is an accumulated rainfall total here going back to the beginning of April through the 1st of August here earlier in the week. It's for Mount Pleasant, but it's representative of much of certainly central lower and then the southern lower as well. But the green is the actual observed accumulation at that point, and the brown is the normal for the date. And you can see again the normal precip for this period of 4 months is approximately about 15 inches. That's what we would typically get, or what climatology says we should get. But if you look at the green line, of course, it's anything but. And again, it's the slope of that line, how much it changes, describing dryness or the opposite, surplus or wetness. You can see that here at this particular site, early April was wet. We had a surplus of water, delays in field work, et cetera, ironically. But then by the middle of April, certainly we went into this long, drawn-out period of very, very, very dry conditions. You can see flat line here. Some cases, no rain for over 3 weeks in a row. That's really unusual in Michigan to see that happen. And the dryness continues all the way up into the last week or so of June. And then it's been, we had that new jet stream pattern across the upper Midwest with troughing and lots of frontal passages. And you can see we've had here more than 10 inches of rain. And that in this case, for this particular site, 12 inches of rain. And so while it says we end up the whole period for 4 months here, we've got a surplus of 3.3 inches. Well, yes, we do, but it just can't begin to describe all of the ups and downs and swings here. And again, the extremes are not good. Unless you sell irrigation equipment, this is not good, and very, very, very unusual. We're looking now at statistics to try to determine if there have been other seasons where we've had such pronounced dryness followed by very, very wet conditions, and they're rare. They're very, very unusual, and I'll update that next week. But to say that it's odd is it doesn't do it justice, but it certainly is. And as I said at the beginning, we're likely to see a little bit more of the same wet pattern here as we look at the forecast. Before we do that, one word about temperature and about growing degree day accumulations. From the beginning of May through the end of July or beginning of August, really our degree day totals for that time frame, base 50, are pretty close to the normal. On the these are the actual totals on the left hand side. The right hand side are the departures from normal, and you can see that those totals at this point in time range from slightly behind normal or below normal for eastern and northern parts of the state, and a little bit above for the West. Again, a few calendar days either way. But it's also important to note, and I think everybody appreciates this, there's a significant portion of our annual crops, especially for corn, that is behind normal, but it's behind because of the dryness earlier. It's not because of thermal accumulation. So we have to use these degree day totals here with a little bit of a grain of salt, because again, unusual or extreme conditions earlier in the year basically delayed the development and phenology of some of these annual crops. On the forecast, well, today we have on the weather map, you can see a cold front just starting to make its way into upper Michigan here this morning. That front's going to be moving through over the next 12 to 18 hours before it clears the state. And typically we would expect to see more in the way of precip. And that's partially true with this frontal boundary, especially what we'll see here during the day as the front moves through is some scattered showers and thunderstorms develop, most likely eastern upper Michigan, but more likely in northeastern lower down towards the Saginaw Valley. I think that's the highest chance when we're talking maybe 40 or 50% odds. There could be a couple of heavy thunderstorms in there, but as we go south of that area, down into the southern lower, the stability of the atmosphere and so forth is greater. And I think we're going to probably just remain dry. It will be a little bit warmer today than it has been. We should see highs up into the mid and upper 80s in many areas. Today and tomorrow will be the warmest days of the upcoming week. But here by tonight, this is at 8 p.m., you can see the front has made it into northern lower with some scattered showers. I think the green here indicating precip is a little bit maybe aggressive. I don't think we're going to see much in the way of precip for much of the southern, probably the southern third at least of lower Michigan. If it does rain, it's going to again be primarily in the northeast and the east central parts of the state. Most everybody else probably will remain dry, and even in the areas that do get rain, it's going to be spotty, generally a quarter of an inch where it does occur, but a lot of areas will remain dry. By tomorrow morning, the front slides south of the state, and cooler, somewhat slightly cooler air, drier air moves in. We will see our high temperatures tomorrow still in the mid 80s, probably low and mid 80s across the state, a little bit cooler on Friday, but it will be cooler as we move into the weekend. Same conditions on Saturday, high pressure across the region. So actually very, very nice outdoor conditions here, both tomorrow and on Saturday. On Sunday, or here's Saturday morning's forecast. You can see high pressure still here, as I mentioned, a beautiful day to be outside. The next weather system, though, that we need to keep our eye on, you can see starting to form out here in the northern plains. That approaches by Sunday. And right now, all of the guidance, we look at the trends in these things over time as we approach the event. This one, there's more and more confidence that this will be a significant weather system. It'll be a frontal passage with a little, an upper air trough or wave going through to drive it. There's a lot going for it. Gulf of Mexico moisture. So it's looking more and more likely that this one will be a significant rainfall event beginning on Sunday, but especially overnight Sunday into Monday, with some lingering rain even possible into Tuesday. And it will be cooler after that. This will bring in some Canadian air after that. So at least the beginning and middle part of next week, probably looking at below normal temperatures. So for our precipitation totals for the upcoming week, what's a lot of reds in here, and that's 2 inches or greater. These are pretty major totals across the state. Again, some spots, again, more than 2 inches, but most areas over 1 inch. I have put in the inset down here and the below most of this precipitation. Again, we do expect some rainfall today in the northeastern part of the state. The vast majority, though, of this total that you see here in the background, that's that system on Sunday and Monday. And again, there's more and more confidence that that's going to happen. So if it does, another significant rainfall event, you can see some of the totals here do at least an inch and a half is expected here at many locations. So that's where the majority of that water in that total is coming from end of the weekend and early next week. Potential evapotranspiration rates reference a little bit above normal. Most areas 0.2 to 0.22 of an inch on average per day during the upcoming week. A lot of that is due to strong sunshine and a lack of clouds other than on Sunday and Monday. But generally just a little bit above normal for water demand here in the upcoming week. And then finally, moving here towards the medium range, what next? Well, on the left-hand side here, if we look at the jet stream pattern, a lot of, you've seen this before, big troughing feature over Hudson Bay and over eastern North America. It's still there. And it's the guidance is continuing to persist this for at least the next 1 to 2 weeks. The 8 to 14 day outlook is almost identical to this, a little bit less amplified. Big ridge out over the west. That's of course, that means that the heat that we've had so many problems with in the U.S., that's going to shift back out towards the west and southwest, but not us. We've got northwesterly flow aloft. And with that, again, for at least the next 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, we're looking at normal to below normal or cooler than normal, mean temperatures, and also frequent chances for precipitation. And I know we'd had some discussion in the chat room and box before here early. July was such a challenging month, and because not just the amount of rain, but the frequency of rain was also a problem, especially for things like forest harvest, which is the last thing you want to see. But we had an above normal number of days. This pattern that we're seeing here, unfortunately, is consistent with that. There would be more frequent chances for rain than typically is the case. So a cooler and wetter than normal, probably for the first half of August. Finally, there is a new updated outlook for August that was done at the end on the 31st of July. Pretty much the same thing. It has officially equal chances, so no forecast direction for either mean temperatures or precip. But it is important to note that a lot of this outlook, a lot of it was based on what you just saw for the first half. And so there is some hint, the guidance suggests possibly a regime change or an upper air change by the middle of the month, possibly that would lead to something different. But the first half right now, more and more confidence that we're stuck in that northwesterly flow aloft. It also means we haven't seen the last probably of the hazy skies. There'll be more smoke transported down. That's a good bet here over the next couple of weeks. But that appears to be locked in for the first half of August, and then maybe we move to something different after that. And so with that, I will wrap up. It's a fairly straightforward forecast here, but again, in some cases, it's a little bit more of a continuity of more of the same as we move ahead. So with that, I will move ahead also here and introduce our speaker for next week, the 10th of August on Virtual Breakfast. We'll have Dr. Erdal Ozkan from Ohio State University. And he's going to be with us here to talk about some technology and drones for spraying pesticides. So don't miss that. Again, that's a week from today.
All right. Thank you, guys. Oh, those are some great presentations, lots of new information. I think I'll open it up maybe to some of the specialists we have on here. I think I saw Marty, if you want to give an update on maybe Taskspot or anything you're seeing.
Sure thing. Thanks, Madeline. We've had a couple more confirmations of Taskspot around the state. It was Lapeer County, I believe, and St. Clair County. We're not 100% sure on that St. Clair County, so I've marked it as probable. I think it probably is, but just waiting for a slightly better picture. And then Van Buren County as well. So they came in on the 1st of August, so just a couple of days ago here. So it's out there and beginning to show in a few more places. So be sure to scout your fields, have an understanding of how much Taskspot might be present in your fields. We've still got plenty of time to put fungicide on if we're still, depending on where things are at. In most years, the best timing is from tassel silk through to about the R3 growth stage. There are some exceptions to that. The latest we've seen some positive response is about mid-August. So that, that can happen. That's sort of more of a rare instance, but that's the update that I have. Oh, the other thing too, Jeff got me thinking, cooler than normal, at least this next 10-day period or so, August, all this moisture definitely makes me think a lot about white mold. So again, if you have had white mold issues in your soybean or dry bean, just be aware of that. So thanks.
Thank you, Marty. I think I'll go to the question box, and then if there's any other specialists on, we can get some updates from them as well. But we do have some questions coming in, maybe a few directed towards Jeff. So Leon is hoping that we're going to get some brilliant young weather student to help us predict. It's been a really hard year for forage harvest. And then a question coming in again from Leanne about the humidity. So mentioning that we need humidity to be below 50% to get good dry bales. So wondering, why is the humidity so high?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it was, and I'm hoping for that student too. By the way, it's
yeah, right.
We all need young, promising people. But regarding the situation with all of the wet days, so in July, I was just doing some numbers, and typically in Michigan for July, the number of days with precip, climatology says it's in the upper 20%. So maybe 1 out of 4 or 5 days that we get with that's what the climatology says. Well, this year we had many more than that. Many cases it was as much as 14 or 15 days, so almost half of the days were wet with precipitation. And again, that obviously is directly results in all of these delays. Or to get that 3-day window it was really tough in July in many parts of the state. But the question about humidity is a good one, because it's also linked with how much water is on the surface and how the plants have, because remember, the plants are using the water and transpire it. Some of it's soil evaporation, and that water vapor is there. That's also a source of more moisture in the air. And the crazy thing is this year that we went from a situation where it was so dry and there were really low humidities early in the season to the exact opposite, just literally weeks later with all of this water in the landscape and a lot of humidity, which led to heavier than normal dews, even when it was dry, on the dry days, and the dew stays there longer. It takes longer to evaporate than it typically does. So the whole mix pushes you towards that wetter. We went from one extreme to another. Again, another way of looking at that, and that dryness and all those problems with wetness are related to that, unfortunately. Now, there's also a great comment. We had northwesterly flow. You said we had, and we did. There were some days though where we did get flow out of the south, but it just, again, I think the key was the water on the landscape that's already there. So it's not from additional precipits as much directly as it is with water that's already on the top of the landscape. And the drainage turned out to be a really good topic here for today. We wouldn't typically see that in August and in Michigan, but this year, because of the July, it's just been very, very unusual.
Right. And now I have a few questions, Hassan, for you, talking about all of this water. Phil asks, how much water is a heavy rainfall? So 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, how long does it take? Yeah.
Yeah, so heavy rainfall really, um, others could chime in, but I would say an inch, half an inch or above, but causing flow that would actually harm the crop really depends on the moisture of the soil at the time of the rainfall. If it's in January and is the snow melt and is already saturated, then there's a little bit of rainfall on top of that could create lots of flow coming. And then if it were like after the following dry June and then the rains came, we didn't get any tile flow until about like 2 inches of rain came, because that soil is dry. It's like a sponge. It's slowly absorbing. So it really depends on the time of the year and what the soil moisture is at that time, really.
So
That's why
knowing
I didn't give a
your
number.
field, knowing how much rain causes problems on your farm. Phil also asked about the drain spacing tool, wondering if it indicates what size the main should be, even if you're splitting the laterals
Yeah,
or
the drains.
planning to.
Yeah, there's another. I have another tool that will tell you what size your main should be if you're splitting your laterals. So let's say a lot of people on this call and a lot of farmers, they split laterals. But if you're splitting laterals, I recommend you take a look at this other tool. It's called Splitting Laterals Calculator, to know what size of main you need. Otherwise, it's going to be a guessing game, and you don't want to guess. I would say in drainage, you want to do it properly. That's my way of doing things. The right way is the best way.
Is there a way to access that tool, maybe?
Yeah, I can put it in the chat.
Okay. Another question here for you, Hassan, and this is coming from Mark Seaman. So Mark says, I've seen crop damage from rainfall amounts that wouldn't normally cause problems. It seemed like we had lots of capacity to hold water in the soils that were so dry and wouldn't have seen negative crop response. Is there something that happens to very dry soil that causes the water maybe to move more slowly and cause more problems?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Mark. I would say, so in terms of the soil physics, if the soil is drier, infiltration, meaning water moving into the soil, is faster. It's like a sponge. If it's dry, it can take water. And the soil, when the soil is wetter, so the soil was drier, so it should have taken more water. It could be related to how intense that rain came down. And because we did have July, we did have high intensity rainfall. Jeff mentioned that. It could be related to that. And if that comes in, if it's so intense and it's dry, it still doesn't have that capacity to infiltrate fast enough into the soil. It could be related to what was the vegetation. Was it covered because it was planted? Probably didn't have so much cover. And the rain comes in, it could disperse the soil particles. It could be soil dispersion. It could be the cover protection that was absent at that time, like I mentioned. So you wouldn't expect that, and it could have been the intensity, like I mentioned. But I am unaware of anything that would say if the soil is drier, it would have slow infiltration. It's opposite. So if the soil is drier, infiltration rate should be faster.
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody else has any questions, like anything about water, it doesn't have to be about underperformance or anything about water, phosphorus, nutrients.
Leon also mentions that all of this rain that came in July caused a lot of damage to soybeans. I don't know if there's anybody else on that might want to comment on that. Why is this much rain at this time in the season affecting the soybeans in the low areas? I don't know who we have on.
Some of it's just anoxic conditions, or a combination of anoxic conditions and root rots. There's a little bit of phytophthora around, and that's really going to be favored by those saturated soil conditions.
Thanks, Marty.
Mhm.
We do have a question for Chris Stefanzo, and maybe if you want, I think I saw Chris. If you're on, we're wondering where the monarchs are, and if you have anything else that you want to give an update on, this would be a good opportunity. Maybe.
I'm not sure she's on,
Oh,
Madeline.
okay. I thought I saw her earlier, but yeah, that's okay. And I think that's made it through all of the questions I have in the chat. If there's any questions that aren't in the chat and that you would like to unmute yourself and offer to the group, then I would invite you to do that now. It looks like Asan did post the tool to help properly size your main. You can take a look at that now. There's quite a few links in the chat from Asan's presentation that I would encourage you to take a look at. But if we are done with questions, or here. Then I guess we can end a little bit early.
Madeline, I'll say thank you so much to Dr. Andresen and Dr. Gane for their presentations today. And I'm really looking forward to next week with our special speaker from Ohio State University talking about drones and using them for spraying pesticides. So with that, we'll see everyone next week.